Every unmarried lady in 3 counties came to Wexmore Hall, the day its gates were opened, powdered, practiced, and hungry for one cold duke's attention. Only one woman turned her back on the whole glittering hunt. While the others pressed toward the terrace to be noticed, she pushed the other way, into the crowd, and knelt in the mud to save a frail old stranger no one else would even look at. She did not know the woman whose failing heart she held in her hands, and she had no idea at all that the plain, gray-gowned stranger she had just pulled back from the edge of death was the Duke's own mother. This is the story of Aloan Cray, a healer with a ruined name and a secret she had run 3 years to bury, and the one small kindness that would either destroy her or hand her back everything the world had taken. If quiet courage and hard-won grace are what bring you here, take a moment to subscribe before we begin now. Back to that hot afternoon at Wexmore, where the whole county had come to chase a duke. The heat had baked the great lawns of Wexmore Hall to the color of old straw, and by noon the whole county was standing on them. They had come for the duke. For 3 years the Duke of Sarn had refused every invitation, and now, for reasons the county could only guess at, he had thrown open his park for a single summer afternoon, and every family within 40 miles with an unmarried daughter had answered as though summoned by trumpet. The truth, had the county troubled to learn it, was duller than any of its guessing. His aunt, Lady Wenna, had spent a hard winter pressing him on the want of a wife and an heir, and he had given up one afternoon of his park sooner than give up the argument. He had repented of it before the first carriage was through the gates. The drive was a slow river of carriages. The lawns were a garden of silk. Mothers steered daughters across the grass the way generals move troops, and the daughters, 40 of them, 50, turned their painted fans and their practiced faces all in the same direction, toward the terrace, where at any moment the man himself would appear. One young lady near the fountain had already fainted twice that morning, each time with a careful eye to who stood near enough to catch her. It was, in its quiet way, a kind of warfare waged in muslin and good manners, and every soul on that lawn understood the stakes of it but one. Aloan Cray stood at the very edge of it all, where the mown grass gave way to the rough, and she wanted nothing from the terrace at all. She had come because there was a crowd, and crowds sometimes needed a woman who could sew a straight seam or dress a scald, and she had 14 shillings left in the world, and a false name to keep. She stayed at the margin. She had learned that the margin was the safest place to stand. A woman who is never looked at is never asked her name, and Aloan had 3 years of reasons to keep hers to herself. Then the terrace doors opened. The crowd surged like water, tilting in a bowl, and somewhere in the surge, an old woman went down. Nobody saw it. That was the terrible thing of it. 50 people stood within 10 feet of her, and not one of them looked, because at that same instant, a footman had cried, "The Duke!" and every eye on that lawn had gone up and forward. The old woman had been standing alone near the fountain, in a plain gown of dove gray, unattended, unremarked, and when the crowd pushed, it pushed her off her feet and closed over the place where she had stood as though she had never been there at all. Aloan saw it only because Aloan was watching the ground and not the Duke. She was moving before she had decided to. She put her shoulder into the wall of silk backs and went through them, low and hard, saying nothing, and she came out into a small trampled clearing at the foot of the fountain where an old woman lay on her side, her cap knocked askew, one hand pressed flat and clawed against her chest. Her lips were going the color of slate. Aloan knelt. She did not waste a word. She got an arm under the thin shoulders and turned her, propped her half upright against her own knee, so the laboring chest could open, and with her free hand she loosened the collar, the fichu, the tight tape at the throat, all of it quick and certain. "There," she said low, only for the woman. "There now. You are not going anywhere. Breathe out, not in, out. Let it go first." From her sleeve she drew a brass pocket watch, worn smooth, a man's watch, far too heavy for a woman's hand, and she pressed 2 fingers to the cord of the old woman's throat and watched the second hand and counted fast. Thin, skipping like a flung stone. But there. Slower now, Elowen murmured, as though a heart could be gentled the way one gentles a frightened animal. There is no hurry. Nobody here is going to hurry you. And whether it was the loosened collar, or the cool watch back she laid against the papery wrist, or only the sound of one calm voice in all that noise, the old woman's breath came down rung by rung out of the place where it had jammed. The slate went out of her lips. Her eyes, sharp gray eyes, very much alive, came open and fixed on Elowen's face, with an expression that was not quite gratitude and not quite surprise. It was recognition. As though she had been searching for this exact face for a very long time, and had found it of all places at the foot of a fountain, unable to breathe. "Who are you?" the old woman whispered. "Nobody," said Elowen, and meant it kindly. "Nobody at all. Lie still." She never once looked up at the terrace, which was why she did not see the man standing on it. The Duke of Sarn had come out into the noise and the silk, expecting precisely what he always expected: the fans, the faces, the tilted heads, the whole practiced hunt, turning toward him as one animal. He was a tall man of 32, with a cold, closed face, and he had long since stopped believing that anyone on a lawn like this wanted anything of him but his name and the fortune behind it. Then he had looked past all of them, down to the fountain at the gray-gowned woman on the ground and the girl kneeling over her in the dirt, and every drop of color had drained from his own face, because he knew that gray gown. He knew the set of those thin shoulders. He had not spoken a word to her in 3 years, not since the day they buried his father and everything between them broke. But a man knows his own mother across any distance, in any crowd, on any ground. For a single heartbeat he moved. 1 step toward the stair, and then he stopped himself, the way he had stopped himself 100 times in 3 years. Between him and that fallen gray figure stood 3 years of things said and unsaid, and a man does not cross all of that in front of 40 watching families. And her own people were already closing round her, lifting her, needing nothing from him at all. So he did instead the thing he had trained himself to do. He took his eyes off his mother and put them on the girl, and made his voice cold. "That one kneels for a reason," he said. His voice was very quiet. The steward at his elbow, a smooth, soft-handed man named Absalom Frayne, leaned in to catch it. They always do. Find out what she is after. And when she learns there is nothing in it for her, she will be gone by morning, like all the others. He did not take his eyes from the kneeling girl. Her sort always is. He had never in his life been so wrong about anything. Elowen Cray had come north to vanish. She had told the whole truth to no one in 3 years, and the lies she told were all small ones, built to bury a single large truth. She called herself Elowen Ashby now. Ashby had been her mother's name, and her mother was safely dead and could not be harmed by the borrowing of it. The name she did not use, the name that could still, spoken in the wrong room, finish her, was Cray. Her father had been Doctor Ambrose Cray, and, once, in another life, that name had meant a great deal. He had been the finest physician in 3 counties, a big, gentle, careless man who took the pulse of dukes and drovers with the same 2 fingers and charged the drovers nothing. Elowen had grown up in his surgery. She had learned the fever and the failing heart and the smell of a wound gone bad before ever she learned to dance. When his own hands began to shake, she had quietly become his, and then a great man's son had died. Under his care, already past saving when they carried him in. And the great man had wanted someone to blame. It cost him almost nothing to ruin a country doctor. Struck from the register, his name in every paper, his patients gone inside a week. He died within the year of no illness, Elowen could name but the shame of it, and he left her 2 things. His brass watch and the knowledge that the family who had broken him had sworn to break any Cray who ever again lifted her head. So Elowen kept her head down. She healed where she could quietly, and moved on before anyone thought to ask her name. She had made herself small and useful and entirely invisible. She had not counted on the old woman at the fountain. The old woman was borne into the hall by her own people, grave, silent servants, who appeared from nowhere and closed around her. And Elowen, her work done, did what she always did. She turned to melt back into the crowd and be gone. She did not manage it. A message reached her at the village inn that same night. The lady she had helped wished her to call at Wexmore Hall and would send a gig in the morning. The lady's name, the note said, was Mrs. Auberly. She was lodged in the dower wing as a guest of the house, and she desired a companion who understood sickness. Elowen should have run. A companion is looked at. A companion is asked her history, her people, her name. But 14 shillings is 14 shillings, and something in those sharp gray eyes had caught her like a hook. Set under the rib, she went, and within 3 days of coming to Wexmore she understood that she had walked into a dying place. Not the hall. The hall was all gold and glass and 40 idle servants. It was the valley beneath it, Nethercombe, the village was called, and Nethercombe was sick. A low, wasting fever had been moving through the cottages since spring, creeping from one hearth to the next, and no one with any power had yet said the word aloud. She had felt it before anyone told her. Riding down that first week, she had passed cottages with their shutters closed against the summer sun, and doors where a sprig of rue had been nailed up and then taken down again. And she had counted 3 houses in a single lane gone quiet in the particular way a house goes quiet when it is waiting for someone inside it to die. A healer learns that silence young, and it never quite leaves her. She knew she ought to keep her head down. She had come to Wexmore precisely to be nobody, and nobody does not go hunting out a dying valley to mend. But she had never once in her life managed to look away from suffering she could reach. I can't walk past, she thought, standing in that silent lane, and knew, with a small sink of the heart, that the thing was already decided. There was no doctor. The last had gone and never been replaced. There was meant to be a parish fund for the relief of the sick poor, as every great estate kept one. There was meant to be an infirmary cottage stocked with physic. Elowen found the infirmary cottage locked. When she talked her way inside, she found the medicines watered to colored water and chalk. And she found that every shilling of the relief fund, every order for physic, every account for the sick of Nethercombe, passed through the soft, clean hands of a single man, a man who answered to no one, because the master of the house would not look. His name was Absalom Frayne, and Mr. Frayne, she was very soon to learn, did not care to be asked questions. Mrs. Auberly kept to 3 rooms in the dower wing at the cold north end of the house, and she kept to them by choice. That was the first strange thing Elowen noticed. The second was that, though the old woman wore plain gray and took her tea without ceremony, the great servants of Wexmore, the butler, the housekeeper, people who would not have turned their heads for a bishop, came the instant she rang and left the room walking backward. Elowen noticed these things and said nothing. She had built a whole life out of noticing things and saying nothing. "Sit," said Mrs. Auberly, a fortnight into her service, "there where I can see your face. I am 79, and I have not the time left to address the top of a bowed head." Her voice was dry and light and entirely accustomed to being obeyed. "You started my heart on that lawn when it had stopped. Do not trouble to deny it. 3 physicians have warned me it would fail me in a crowd, and it did. And a girl with a laborer's watch set it going again. Where did you learn that?" "From my father, ma'am." "And who was your father?" There it was, the question. Come already. On the 3rd day, Elowen felt the old cold clutch of it close on her chest. "A country doctor," she said. "He is dead. He had a name, I imagine. Most men do, ma'am." Something moved at the corner of Mrs. Auberly's mouth that was not quite a smile. "So you will hand me the fever in my village, the chalk in my medicines, and the thief who keeps my accounts. and I have known you barely a fortnight, but your own name you keep behind your teeth like a coin you dare not spend. Good. A person with nothing to hide has usually nothing worth guarding. I shall not ask again. Today. Eloan raised her eyes, and the sharp gray gaze was waiting, and in it was something that frightened her more than Frayne's soft smile ever had. It was understanding. You hide, said Mrs. Auberly, not unkindly. You have made an art of it. You go where no eye falls, you do your good, where it cannot be traced, and you are gone before the thanks arrive. It is a fine way to keep yourself safe. It is a poor way to stop a man like Absalom Frayne. Then she named the thing that changed everything. The master of this house, she said, and there was a small, deliberate pause on the word that Eloan would remember much later, wagered his steward. You would be packed off by morning. That was a fortnight ago. You are still here. I should very much like to see how wrong a proud man can be made. From the workbag beside her chair she drew a ring of 3 iron keys, old, worn, bright with handling. The still room at the south end has stood locked 20 years. It was mine, once when these hands could still weigh a grain. There was no physic in the old books. I could not make. It is yours now. So's the infirmary in Nethercombe. The key is coming to you, for I have put a question to Mr. Frayne. He cannot afford to have me ask twice. She set a purse on the table beside the keys. That is my own money, not the estate's. You will physic my valley from it. Keep me a fair account, and when Frayne comes to stop you, and he will, you will not argue with him. You will send him to me. The old eyes glittered. Wear the keys where the whole house can see them, child. A thing carried in the open is the one thing a quiet man can never quietly make disappear. Eloan looked at the keys and did not touch them. Ma'am, I am only a companion. In this wing you are what I tell you that you are. Mrs. Auberly held her gaze. I did not survive 79 years and one long marriage to be instructed in my own authority by a girl who mended me with a watch. Take them. Eloan took the keys. They were heavier than they looked. She did not yet know whose young hand had worn them bright, nor why an old woman in a plain gray gown should command a duke's servants like a queen in exile. She knew only that, for the first time in 3 years, someone had looked directly at her, and not looked away, and that this, far more than Frayne, far more than the fever, was the thing with the power to undo her. The still room had been shut so long the lock fought her, but it turned. And inside lay 20 years of dust, and beneath the dust lay everything a healer could pray for, shelves of blue glass, a squat copper still, a loft of hanging herbs gone to gray powder, and a row of receipt books in a fine faded hand, a young woman's round, careful script, the same on every label. Eloan did not let herself wonder whose it was. She had a fever to fight. She scoured the room out in 2 days. She stripped the tangled physic garden of whatever had outlived 20 years of neglect. Feverfew, elder, willow, the stubborn survivors, set the copper still breathing again, and by week's end she was carrying a covered basket down the hill to Nethercombe every morning before the hall had woken. The village would not have her. Why should it? She was a slight woman with a workman's watch and a quiet voice, and Nethercombe had learned the hard way that anything sent down from the hall came watered with chalk. The first cottage would not let her pass the step. The second took her draft with thanks and tipped it in the gutter the moment she turned. She saw them do it. She did not scold, and she did not plead. Persuasion had never once been her gift. Patience was the whole of it. So she simply came back the next day and the day after to the one door that would open to her the boy Tobin, 6 years old, and burning under every blanket his family owned. She sat with him 3 nights. She brought the fever down with cool cloths and willow bark and the plain animal comfort of a hand that did not let go. And on the 4th morning, the boy sat up and asked for bread. His mother told one other mother. That was all it took. A cure travels faster than any rumor, and by the turn of the month, there was not a cottage in Nethercombe that did not leave its door on the latch for the woman with the brass watch. And once they let her in, she did not stop at the fever. She set the blacksmith's crushed thumb and would take nothing for it. She lanced the miller's poisoned hand and told him to keep his cheese. She showed 3 young mothers how to scald their water and their linen, and the summer sickness that crept through the low cottages every year did far less harm that season than it had ever done before. She made out no bill, and she asked for no coin at any door, and the village, which had braced itself all its life to be cheated by the Hall, did not at first know what to make of a person who simply did the good thing and walked home. In the end, they settled it the only way. Plain people can. They began to love her. She won the Hall itself the same way, not by asking, but by being needed. She dressed the scald on the second footman's arm that the old steward had left to fester. She sat up 2 nights with the housekeeper's dying sister and asked for nothing but hot water. One by one, the great cold servants, who had bowed to no companion in a year, began to bring her the small hurts and quiet troubles they had grown tired of carrying to a master who would not hear them. She had, without a title and without ever wanting one, begun to be the person the whole house came to. The Duke noticed the change the way a man notices the weather has turned, without ever having watched it turn. He did not go down to Nethercombe. Dukes did not, but he could not help seeing, from the high windows of a morning, that there were children in the lane again, that the black crape had come down off 2 cottage doors, that the churchyard had gone 3 weeks now without a fresh-turned mound. He found himself looking, of an evening, for a small figure with a basket on the hill road. He told himself, each time, that he was not. Not everyone was glad of her. There was a book running in the servants' hall by her 3rd week. Everyone knew of it, and it was reckoned a fair wager. A shilling that the healing woman would be turned out by Michaelmas, worn down by the cold rooms and the closed master and the pink steward who ruled them both. The betting ran heavily against her. Even the kitchen maid who liked her had laid her 6pence, quietly, on the month. Aloan learned of the wager within days because a woman who has been invisible all her life hears a great deal that louder people miss. She did not resent it. On the whole, she thought it a sensible bet. She had made much the same one herself the day she came north, with a false name and a workman's watch. "You are making enemies," Mrs. Auberly told her one afternoon, and sounded thoroughly delighted about it. "A loud one and a quiet one. Mind the quiet one. The master of this house will forgive a great deal sooner than Frayne will ever forgive being made unnecessary." She watched Aloan over the rim of her cup with those unclouded gray eyes. You wonder how an old guest in a plain gown comes to read a duke's temper so well. Wonder away, child. You are not the only soul beneath this roof keeping a name behind her teeth. Aloan said nothing to that, but she carried it down the stairs with her, and it sat oddly, the way a figure that will not add sits oddly at the foot of a column. We'll pause the story here just for a breath. If you're the sort who hates to miss how a tale like this one turns out, take a moment to subscribe. It genuinely helps the channel, and it makes certain the next chapter finds its way back to you. Now, back to Wexmoor. The Duke found her in the lane the following evening, coming up from the village with her empty basket. He had ridden that way to be quit of the drawing-room and the 2 young ladies his aunt had left behind like forgotten gloves, and he had not thought to meet a soul. "You are the woman from the lawn," he said. "Yes, your grace." She did not curtsy, and dimple and hunt, for a reason to keep him talking, the way every other woman on that estate did. She looked up at him, level and gray-eyed, and wholly unafraid, waiting to learn whether he had anything worth her stopping for, and when it seemed he had not, she inclined her head to go on up the hill. It halted him where he sat his horse. He was not a man that people walked away from. "The fever," he said, "too quickly. They tell me it is turning. It is, sir. Fewer take it now, and those that have it keep their strength." She paused and then gave it to him plainly, the way she would report a pulse. It would turn faster with good Peruvian bark. There is none in your stores, though your accounts say a great quantity was bought and paid for. No accusation was in it. She simply set the fact down between them and waited to see what he would do with it. Something flickered behind the cold face. Not guilt, she thought, but the deep-buried tiredness of a man who has trained himself not to look at his own house. "Speak to Frayne," he said at last. "The accounts are his." "I know they are, sir," said Aloan. "That is rather the whole of the difficulty." And she went on up the hill, and left him sitting his horse in the dusk, unable to say why the valley he had spent 3 years wishing himself out of should feel for one moment like somewhere worth remaining. That night she could not sleep. If a great quantity of bark had been bought, and no grain of it stood in the stores, then it was somewhere, and a thing that is somewhere can be found. She lay in the dark and listened to the old house settle around her, and she knew, the way she knew, a fever before the skin would own it, that she had come to the edge of something she would not be able to walk quietly away from. She had spent 3 years making herself small enough to slip through the world unseen. She lay awake now with the cold understanding that a valley full of sick children was going to cost her exactly that. Frayne kept his kingdom at the end of the Staple Court, a dispensary and an office behind one locked door, where the estate's physic was stored and its accounts were kept, and where in 3 years no one had set foot but Frayne himself. Aloan carried the infirmary key now, by Mrs. Auberly's word, and the infirmary shared a wall with the dispensary, and she found a connecting door Frayne had grown careless enough to leave unbolted, because for 3 years no one in the house had ever looked. She went in on the morning he rode to Ashcombe for the quarter's business. She told herself she was only fetching salves. She knew perfectly well she was not. The dispensary was near empty. That was the first wrong thing. The shelves the accounts swore had been stocked held almost nothing. But against the far wall, roped and sealed and directed in Frayne's own clean hand, stood a dozen wooden crates. She worked one open with a salve knife, Peruvian bark, cud bark, whole, red-brown, bitter as truth, pounds upon pounds of it. The one medicine on earth that would break the fever in the valley below. And every crate was addressed to a druggist's house in the city, 60 miles from the nearest sick child in Nethercombe. She understood everything in that moment, the way one understands a fall, the instant a foot goes off the step. On the desk lay the fair book posted for form's sake. Bark and physic, bought for the relief of the sick poor, sums need, the master's careless signature at the foot of each page. In the drawer beneath lay the other, the true tally in the same soft hand, the same bark, sold on to the city druggist, the money running clean off the page and out of the valley into no name but Frayne's. He had bought the cure with the Duke's money, in the Duke's name, for the Duke's dying people, and sold it for his own gain, and left the fever to do the rest. It was not the theft of shillings. It was the theft of lives. Tobin's 3 burning nights, the fresh graves in the churchyard, the mother who had stopped expecting help. All of it, so a soft-handed man might keep 2 books and grow fat on a season of the dead. Aloan did not take the books. She copied what she needed in her own small hand, fast, by the cold window, and set everything back as she had found it, the ledger squared, the crate re-roked. She was drawing the door shut behind her when she heard the yard gate and market day mud coming heavy up the cobbles. Frayne had come home early. She was in the infirmary with a jar of salve in her hand and her heart going like a hare when he opened the door. His soft pink face was smiling. His eyes were doing no such thing. "You have grown very fond of my dispensary, Miss Ashby," he said pleasantly, "for a lady's companion." And Aloan understood, with the copied figures burning in her pocket, that she now knew enough to hang him, and that to use one word of it she must stand up in daylight and be seen, give her true name to a great house, and let it run back down every road she had fled up. To save Nethercombe, she would have to dig up Eloan Cray with her own 2 hands. She smiled at him, and kept her voice as level as a counted pulse. "I keep the hours the sick keep, Mr. Frayne," she said. "Good morning to you." It was not until she had bolted the still-room door behind her that she let herself sit down and found that for a long while she could not make her hand hold the pen. Frayne moved first, and he moved the way he did everything. He did not accuse her. A clever thief never accuses. He arranges within a week of finding her in his dispensary. The infirmary key she carried no longer turned in the infirmary lock. The lock had been changed, he explained, smiling. For her own protection, there having lately been thefts. The gig that had carried her basket down to Nethercombe was wanted elsewhere of a morning. Auberly's purse bought less at the Ashcombe druggist's than it had a fortnight before, for word had gone ahead that the young woman from the hall was not to be given credit. Each small thing was nothing on its own. Together they were a wall, going up brick by soft brick around her, and she knew to the ounce whose hand was laying it. She could have gone to the Duke. She turned it over for 3 nights, the copied figures sewn into the lining of her workbox, and she did not go. Her reasons were good ones, and one of them was cowardice, and she was honest enough to call it by its name. To go to the Duke was to be asked how a companion came by such figures, and why a companion kept accounts at all, and behind those questions stood her own name, and behind her name stood the grave of Ambrose Cray and the great family that had dug it. A companion who accused the steward and could not survive the asking of who she was would be turned off with a bad character. A Cray turned off with a bad character would be traced. She had run too far and too long to be run to ground over a fight that was not, she told herself, hers. She told herself that for exactly as long as it took the fever to take a soul she could not save. His name was Ephraim, and he was the oldest man in Nethercombe, a shepherd who had walked those hills for 60 years and tended his own flock with a gentleness Eloin had rarely met in men who called themselves physicians. She had been fighting for him a week with Willow and Elder and everything the ransacked still-room could give her. Everything but the one thing that would have answered, which sat roped in a crate in a locked room 100 yards from where the old man lay burning. Eloin sat with him the last night. She held the worn, work-hardened hand and counted the failing pulse on her father's watch until there was nothing left to count, and a little before dawn the counting stopped, and his wife of 50 years made a sound that Eloin would carry to the end of her life. She walked back up the hill in the gray light with the dead weight of it in her chest, and somewhere on that hill the last of her caution burned away and did not come back. Because that was the whole of the machine, and she saw it plainly. Now Frayne had never needed to be clever, only patient. He had built his fortune on other people's goodness, on a grieving master who would not look, on tenants too loyal to complain, on a healing woman too frightened for her own skin to speak. Everyone in it was being careful, and a house full of careful, frightened, grieving people could be quietly emptied of everything it had, and go on being emptied, until one person was willing to stop being careful and be seen. She went home and washed the grave clay off her hands and made up her mind. She could not go to the Duke as a companion carrying a rumor. He would not believe her, or Frayne would call her a hysteric and have her turned off inside the week. She needed the thing itself, the proof laid out so plainly that no smile on earth could talk it away. So, she began to build it the way her father had taught her to read a body. From the outside patiently, sign by sign, trusting that a true thing leaves the same mark everywhere a person cares to look. She could not get back into the dispensary. Frayne kept it bolted now, and watched. She did not need the dispensary. She needed the world outside it, and that Frayne could not lock. She got the Ashcombe carrier to tell her, over the honest cover of the kitchen orders, what crates he had carried from the hall to the city coach, and when, and in whose name. She got the old sexton to let her copy the burial register 3 years back, how many, how young, how thick they lay in the fever months, and the numbers set beside the estate's own record of a valley in good health and good heart told a flat and terrible story of their own. She wrote to the city druggist herself, in the character of a housekeeper wanting good bark cheaply, and kept his reply, which named a price and a quantity that no honest account at Wexmore had ever carried. She had 3 tenants make their marks to a plain statement of the physic they had begged for and never been given while their children burned. She kept it in the false bottom of her work-box, beneath the darning wool, where no maid would think to look and no steward would dare, and she added to it each night by a single candle with her door bolted. She had understood from the first that half a case was worse than none. A rumor Frayne could laugh away, a ledger, a register, a druggist's letter, and the marks of honest people he could not. She had learned patience the way other girls learned the pianoforte, through long, unwilling hours, until it is simply a thing the hands know how to do without being told. She could wait a man out. She had waited 3 years already. Twice he nearly had her. Once he came upon her in the north passage after dark, a candle in her hand, and asked, very gently, what a companion could want so near his office at that hour. She was walking off a headache, she said. It was a lie, and he could not prove it was a lie, and he stood looking at her a long moment with no smile at all. I will give you a word of counsel, Miss Ashby, he said at last, soft as a man laying down a card, from one servant to another. This is a large house, and there's a great deal of dark in it, and a young woman with no family and no friends, for you have none, have you, does well to keep to her physic and ask no questions whose answers cannot help her. Companions come, and they go here. They do not last. I should be sorry to see you go before your time. How kind, said Eloan. But I have always kept excellent accounts, Mr. Frayne. It is the one thing I do that no one has ever wished me to stop. She lifted her candle. Good night. She walked past him with her spine straight and her face still. And it was only on the dark stair, out of his sight, that she let herself understand the thing she had seen under the smile for half a second. He was afraid of her. That was the whole of it. He had come to frighten her, and it was his own fear that had driven him. Because a quiet man who has built everything on no one in the house looking does not sleep once one person has begun to look. The second time was worse. He came into the still room without knocking one evening, while her workbox stood open on the table, and though the false bottom was closed, a single copied sheet lay out beside it, the druggist's figures plain in her own hand. She did not snatch at it. Snatching is how a thing gets itself noticed. She laid her sleeve across it as she rose, gathered it up with a fistful of still-room notes as though it were so much waste paper, and asked him pleasantly whether he had come for the burn salve she had promised the cook. He had not. He had come to look. He looked a long while, at the box, at the shelves, at her steady hands, and found nothing he could put a name to, and went out at last with the door left pointedly open behind him. She sat down. When he was gone, and for a full quarter of an hour, she did not trust her legs to carry her. And while she built her case in the dark, in the daylight, without either of them quite deciding upon it, she and the Duke came to know one another. It began over nothing, as these things do. He had taken to riding down toward the village of an evening, and he would fall in beside her on the hill road, and they would speak of the sick, and then of other things. She did not defer to him, and she did not flatter him, and she did not ever angle. It was so wholly unfamiliar to him that at first he took it for coldness, and only slowly understood that it was the opposite. It was that she wanted nothing from him, and so she gave him the one thing no other soul on that estate would, the plain truth, level and unafraid, as though he were simply a man walking up a hill in the dusk. Once, when a whole family down the lane went into the fever together in a single night, he got down off his horse and carried water and coal and split kindling in his shirt sleeves until dawn, taking his orders from a healing woman as meekly as any groom, and in the gray morning he sat on a cottage step with his fine coat ruined and his hands black and said, I have been master of this valley 3 years. I do not think I have once been of the smallest use to a single soul in it. He said it without pity for himself, as a plain finding. Eloan, too tired to be careful, said, Then you have made a beginning, your grace, which is more than most men trouble to do." And he looked at her as though she had handed him something he had not known he was allowed to want. He told her the shape of his own ruin one evening, without meaning to. They had fallen to talking, in the last of the light, of how a house so fine should have let itself go so far, and he was quiet a while, and then he said, not looking at her, "3 years ago I was to be married. She was everything the county admired, and I mistook being admired for being seen. My mother did not mistake it. My mother told me plainly the girl loved my name and my fortune, and would drop both the day a larger name and fortune presented themselves. I was very angry. I said things to my mother that a son should not say and cannot unsay." A pause. 3 weeks later, the girl did exactly what my mother had promised she would, in front of half of London. 3 weeks after that, my father died, and I found I could not forgive my mother for having been right, because it was so much easier to be angry than to be ashamed. So I shut up half this house, and I shut her out along with it, and I have not spoken a true word to her since. He turned the thought over, like a stone he had carried too long. I told myself I had stopped believing in people. The truth is duller than that. I stopped looking at them. It is remarkable how much a man can fail to see once he has decided that looking will only cost him something. Aloan thought of the watered medicine and the roped crates and the fresh small grave in the churchyard. All the rot that thrives in a house whose master has resolved not to look. And she did not say that she was sorry, because she had learned from an old woman in a gray gown. She said instead, "Then perhaps it is time your grace looked again. You may be astonished how much is still standing, and still worth the saving. You look at everything," he said. "Does it never cost you?" "Always," she said. "I have only never found a way to stop. I can't walk past. It is the nearest thing I own to a fault, and the nearest thing I own to a faith, and I have never once been able to tell the two apart." Something eased at the corner of his mouth, the near cousin of a smile, and she saw, under the cold and the 3 years of not looking, precisely what his mother must once have seen. Not a hard man, but a drowning one, still holding his breath, waiting to learn whether it was safe to come up for air. She told herself very firmly that it was none of her affair. She had come to save a village and clear a name and vanish. She had not come to save a duke. She very nearly believed it. She reckoned, however, without Mrs. Verena Calthorpe. Mrs. Calthorpe arrived in the last week of June, one of several handsome, well-connected, comfortably impoverished women whom the Duke's aunt kept depositing at Wexmore like cards laid face up on a table. But where the others chased and simpered and gave it up, Mrs. Calthorpe settled in and watched. She was 35, handsome in a hard, bright way, the widow of a man who had left her a great name and not a shilling to keep it in, and she had arrived, some years since, at the cold conclusion that the world owed her a restoration and would never pay it unless she took it with her own 2 hands. She had chosen Wexmore. If she could not be its duchess, and the Duke had never once looked at her in that way, then she would be the quiet power behind its shut door, and she had chosen her instrument 3 years back, or he had chosen her. It came to the same thing. Frayne settled her small, ruinous debts out of the estate's silent overflow, and she in turn spoke well of him to the aunt, smoothed his way and kept the drawing room from ever wondering aloud where the money went. Each propped up the other. Neither could have stood alone. She had been at the hall 3 days when she understood a thing that Frayne, for all his softness, had missed. She saw the shortened distances in the house, the servants who carried their troubles to the companion, the master who now rode down a hill he had not troubled with in 3 years, and where Frayne saw only a danger to his accounts, Verena Calthorpe saw a rival for a throne, and she saw one thing more, for she had spent her whole life learning to read exactly what people took the most pains to bury. She saw that the healing woman was not merely useful. She was hiding. "Ashby," she said one afternoon, sweetly, over Mrs. Auberly's tea, turning the name upon her tongue like a sugared almond she meant to crack. How singular a name! One is certain one has heard it, and yet one cannot place the people at all. "Where are your Ashbys from, Miss Ashby?" "Nowhere your circle would know, ma'am. My father was a plain man of the north. Was he, and left you nothing. Poor creature, so that you must carry an old woman's baskets for your bread. How very wearing it must be, to have been born a little above one's fortune, neither served nor serving, always, the one step from being found out." She sipped. "I do watch, Miss Ashby. It is my one accomplishment. My hostess believes me an idle woman. But I watch." Eloin met the pale, bright, watchful eyes, and understood that here, and not in the bolted dispensary, stood the truer danger. "Then you keep a finer book than I do, ma'am," she said pleasantly. "I never had the trick of watching people. I only ever learned to watch the sick." From the depths of her chair, Mrs. Bajat Auberly made a small, dry sound that in a less formidable woman would have been a laugh. When Mrs. Calthorpe had swept away, the old woman set down her cup. "That one," she said, "has spent 15 years being poor among people who were once her equals, and it has boiled everything soft in her down to the bone. Do not pity her where she can see it. She will never forgive you for it. And do not, on any account, let her learn the name you keep behind your teeth." The sharp gray eyes rested on Eloin a long moment. "We all keep one, child. The whole art of it is to choose the hour. The name is spoken aloud, and never, never to let another hand choose that hour for you." It was, Eloin thought long afterward, the truest counsel anyone ever gave her. It was also, though neither of them yet knew it, already too late. But Verena Calthorpe had heard the small, flat catch in the girl's voice on the word father, and it was enough for a woman who lived by such catches. She had among the wreck of her grand connections a cousin married to a country attorney, and she set that cousin, in the mild and patient way of country attorneys, to asking a mild and patient question, whether anyone in the northern counties recalled a doctor's daughter, 22 or thereabouts, who had left her people the previous autumn under some cloud that was not quite spoken of aloud. It would take a few weeks. Such answers always did, but such answers always came. Meanwhile, Eloin, carrying her physic and her secret and her growing dossier up and down the hill, had begun to notice things she could not make add up. She noticed that Mrs. Ron Auberly, who never once left the dower wing, knew matters. She could only have known if the great servants reported to her as to a mistress. She noticed the still-room labels in that fine young hand, and the way the old knotted fingers had rested upon them once just for a moment, with the particular tenderness a person keeps only for their own younger self. She noticed how, whenever the Duke was spoken of, the sharp old face did something complicated and swiftly folded away. And once, carrying broth along the north passage, she heard the Duke's own voice on the far side of a door she had believed gave onto an empty room, low and rough and quite unlike itself, saying, "Because I was too proud, mother. Is that the word you have waited 3 years to have out of me?" And then a servant had come along the passage, and she had moved on, and told herself she had misheard. She had not misheard, but she was a woman with a great deal of her own to hide, and she had learned long ago that the surest way to keep your own doors locked is to walk past everyone else's without trying the handle. So she walked past this one too. She told herself it was not her affair. She was wrong. It was about to become the whole of her affair, for the answer to Mrs. Metis, Calthorpe's mild inquiry, was already on the North Road, folded into an attorney's careful envelope, and behind that envelope, though not one soul at Wexmore yet knew it, a heavy traveling carriage had turned off the Ashcombe Pike, its blinds drawn against the dust. dock carrying a man who had waited 3 long years to stand face to face with the last living Cray. The carriage came up the Wexmore Drive at noon on a bright, hard-edged day, and it carried the past inside it like a stone shut in a fist. Eloan was in the forecourt with a trug of cut herbs on her arm when it stopped. She saw the door swing open, the heavy, well-shod foot come down onto the gravel, the wine-colored coat, the broad, florid face she had last seen 3 years before across a coroner's court, and the trug slid from her arm and the herbs scattered across the stones. Sir Rowland Thorne had come for her. No one had summoned him. He had run her to ground on his own, the slow, patient way of a man with nothing but time, and a grievance. A country attorney's question echoing into the right drawing room, a half-forgotten name dropped at the right dinner, and the moment he was certain he had come, to look on the daughter of the man he had broken and see her turned out of whatever hole she had found, he loved an audience, and the forecourt gave him one. The Duke had heard the wheels and come down his steps. Mrs. Berwick Calthorpe arrived from the garden at the same moment, a letter in her gloved hand and joy in her face. Frayne appeared, soft-footed, in the doorway, and at the center of them stood the small healing woman among a ruin of scattered herbs, white to the lips. "What," said the Duke, in the cold voice that had once emptied whole rooms, "is the meaning of this?" It came out all at once, and badly. Sir Rowland was delighted to have found a duke to appeal to. "This woman was no Ashby," he said, "but Eloan Cray, daughter of a struck-off physician, disgraced before the county for the death of Sir Rowland's own son and heir, a man dead, a pauper in his shame. The daughter had fled under a false name, worked her way by deceit into honest houses, and was no doubt busy here at whatever a creature of such blood was always busy at. And Mrs. Calthorpe stepped forward with her letter to say precisely what that was. "It is all quite true, cousin," she said in her sweet, hard voice. "I looked into her myself. Someone had to think of this household's safety. The gentleman has told you nothing but fact. A disgraced doctor's daughter living beneath your roof under a name that is not her own, and we need not strain to guess what such a woman wants in a great house, nor why she has spent 2 months so busy copying your accounts." The letter quivered in her hand. "I think only of your safety, cousin, and your mother's, wherever the poor soul may be." Every face in the forecourt turned to Eloan. She looked at the Duke, and she watched the thing she had dreaded for 3 years arrive at last, watched his face close over like a shutter, watched the warmth of the hill road drain out of it, watched him decide, with the whole dead weight of an old betrayal behind the decision, that she was one more woman who had smiled at him and lied. She watched the door close behind his eyes, and she found, standing among the fallen herbs with the whole bright forecourt staring, that she was not afraid. She had built her whole life around never reaching this moment, and now that she stood inside it, the fear she had carried so long simply was not there. Here was the safety unraveling in broad day before the whole staring county, and the heavens had not so much as shifted. The hiding was over, and what stood in its place was only the truth, which had never once been the thing that frightened her. "He has told you the truth," she said, "every word of it." Her voice came clear and carried the length of the forecourt, and she felt it startled them, for they had braced for weeping or for flight. "I am Eloan Cray. My father was Dr. Ambrose Cray, the best and gentlest physician in 3 counties, and he did not kill this man's son. That young man died of a putrid fever that no power under heaven could have turned, and my father sat by him 4 nights running, trying, which is 4 nights longer than any of the fine gentlemen who blamed him afterward ever sat by anyone at all. Sir Rowland needed the death to be somebody's fault, because grief must have a place to put itself, and it came cheaper to break a country doctor than to carry the weight of it. So he broke him. My father died of the shame, and I peeled his name off myself like a wet coat, because a Cray who lifted her head had been promised she would be broken next." She turned from Thorne and spoke now only to the Duke. And yes, I have copied your accounts. In that, and nothing else, Mrs. Calthorpe is right. 2 months of them, in my own hand, lie in my room this moment, the true weight of Peruvian bark your estate has paid for, set against the sealed crates of it in your own dispensary this hour, every one addressed to a druggist 60 miles from a single sick child, the relief fund paid in full on paper and spent on nothing. Her voice held level. An old man called Ephraim died in the Nethercombe Lane a fortnight ago. The oldest soul in your valley, of a fever that one spoonful of your own, bought and paid for bark, would have broken in a night. The man who sold that bark for his own pocket and let him die to keep it quiet is standing in your doorway. He has been smiling at you across it for 3 years. For one whole heartbeat. No one in the forecourt moved or breathed. Then Absalom Frayne made his single mistake. He laughed, a soft, comfortable, good-humored laugh, the laugh of a reasonable man meeting an unreasonable charge. And he knew in the instant it left him that it was the wrong sound, because it is the one sound a man never makes when he is falsely accused of the death of a child, and every soul on that gravel heard it for exactly what it was. The Duke of Sarn turned his head slowly and looked at his steward as though seeing him, truly for the first time. "Fetch both books," he said, "and send to the dispensary for a crate sealed unopened." His gaze came back to Elowen, and it was no longer the shuddered, appraising look he had turned on her that first day in the lane. It was the look of a man who has slept a long while and been struck, all at once and painfully, awake. "And you will show me all of it." Now they did it in the library, and it took the rest of that long day, and a good part of the night. The Duke sent his old butler, Peveril, down into the valley, and one by one the honest people came up in their Sunday coats and laid their plain truths on the library table. The Ashcombe carrier swore to the crates, the dates, the city direction. The sexton brought the burial register, turned it to the fever months, and let the crowded numbers speak. 3 tenants made their marks again to the physic they had begged for and never got, and the city druggist's own letter named the bark, the price, and the buyer, who was not the sick of Nethercombe. Then Peveril fetched the 2 brown books from the estate office and set them side by side with a sealed crate. Frayne made one last soft attempt. The fair book was the only book. He said the young woman was mistaken. A companion could hardly be expected to follow the accounts of a great estate. The Duke did not trouble to answer. He broke the crate's seal with his own hands, lifted out a fistful of good red-brown bark, and let it fall back, and the small, dry rattle of it in the silent room was the case entire, spoken plainer than any witness could have managed. Then he laid the true book open beside the false one and read. It took perhaps 4 minutes. For whatever else he had let himself become, he had never been a stupid man. When he finished, he was very still. He set one hand flat upon the false accounts, upon the 3 years he had signed without ever reading, because signing had always been so much easier than looking, and when at last he spoke, it was not to Frayne. "A child died," he said, to no one, to the shut books, to the dark valley beyond the window. "Children died. In my own valley, for a man's profit, and I put my name to every page of it, because I could not be troubled to read what was set before me." His voice did not climb, it dropped rather to something quiet and final. "That is the whole of my defense, and it is no defense at all." He turned to his steward. "You will be off this land within the hour, and standing before the Ashcombe magistrate by morning, and every figure this lady has set down will be laid on the bench beside you. What you have stolen you will restore, to the last farthing and the last cottage. What cannot be reckoned in farthings, you will answer for to the law." He did not raise his hand. "Peveril, you will not let him from your sight until he is through the gates, nor leave him one moment alone beside an open drawer." Frayne went. There was nothing else left for him to do. At the door, he turned once, all the soft pink pleasantness fallen away, and looked at Elowen with a naked hatred. "You were nothing," he said, "a ruined doctor's brat with a borrowed name. I still cannot see how you did it. I looked, Mr. Bray. Frayne, said Alowan quietly. That is the whole of it. It is a remarkable thing, what a person turns up once they are willing to look. But Sir Roland Thorne was not a man to be put out by the fall of a steward. Very affecting, he said, rising. You have caught yourself a thief. It alters nothing about the girl. She is a Cray, and a Cray's word is worth a very great deal more than yours, Sir Roland. Rather more, I should think, than most words in this room. The voice came from the library door, old and dry and level, and it fell across the room like a dropped glass. Mrs. Auberly stood in the doorway, but she was not dressed as Mrs. Blank Auberly. Now the plain gray was gone. She stood very straight, for all her years, in gray silk and old diamonds that caught the candlelight, and the servants in the room, Peveril and the 2 footmen, did a thing that turned Alowan's blood cold and strange. As one and without a word they bowed. Perhaps, said the old woman, moving into the room, it is time I was made known properly. Since we are all being so honest tonight, I am Rosamond, Dowager Duchess of Sarn. This is my house in every way that signifies. And this, she crossed to Alowan and laid a knotted hand on the girl's rigid arm, is the young woman who knelt in the dirt at a public fete to start a stranger-stopped heart, not knowing her from any beggar on the grass, and asking nothing for it. I know exactly what she is, Sir Roland. She is the one wholly honest soul I have found beneath this roof in 3 years, and I do not accept my own blood from the Count. Alowan stood as though turned to stone. Mrs. Auberly. The plain gray gown, the stopped heart. She had counted back to life on her father's watch in the wet grass. The sharp old woman she had tended and teased and, without ever meaning to, come to love, was the Duke's mother, was the Duchess of Sarnay. Had been, all this while, the still and secret center of the house she had believed she wandered into by pure accident, and across the room the Duke of Sarn was looking at his mother, truly looking at her for the first time in 3 years, with the face of a man who has just found the thing he broke and learned it had been standing in his own house the entire time, waiting only for him to turn his head. That left Mrs. Calthorpe. She had sat still through the whole long reckoning, and watched the apparatus she had helped assemble come to pieces, one board at a time. Her letter, that morning's proof and triumph, was crushed to a knot in her fist. She had understood the instant the Dowager named herself that it was finished. Sir Roland Thorne was shown out by the Duke's cold courtesy, with the promise made like a threat that the truth of the young man's death would be established and published, and that any door shut against the name of Cray on Thorne's account would be answered for to the Duke in person. Thorne went, and the old vendetta went with him, but when her own turn came, Verena Calthorpe rose and made one last throw. You will enjoy this, I dare say, she said to the Duke. Your devoted cousin, who let your steward quiet her debts, and do not imagine I never knew where that money came from, and where am I to go? 100 a year and a black cap, and a name too grand to feed. I was married off at my family's word, and buried him, and my whole reward was to be poor in front of the people who used to be my equals. There has not been one night in your life you did not know which bed was yours. I am frightened, that is all. I have been frightened 15 years without a day off, and it wears a person down past anything you would credit. The Duke's face had gone hard again. He opened his mouth, and Alowan knew that whatever came out would be just, and that justice would finish Verena Calthorpe turned out disgraced. The county told your grace, said Alowan. Will you allow me? He looked at her. He closed his mouth. He inclined his head. Alowan crossed to the frightened, upright, hateful woman who had tried that very morning to destroy her. She did not gloat. She had learned long ago that a person who has wronged you braces hardest to be gloated over, and that the fastest way to be free of them is the one response they never prepared against. "You let this estate settle your debts," she said quietly. "That is stealing, and you know it, and so does His grace. But you never watered a sick child's cup, and you never sold the cure out from under a dying valley. That was Frayn's hand, not yours. You stood by and took your share and held your tongue, which is exactly what I did myself, until this morning. I would make a poor judge to hang you for my own sin." She held the terrified gaze. "You have spent 15 years reading people for their weakest places. There is honest work in this county for eyes that sharp as still room to put right accounts to keep straight now. Someone means to read them. If His grace is willing, you might have a place, and a small sound cottage, and earn your bread by being useful instead of afraid. You would be beholden to no one for it, least of all to me. I want that understood." Verena stared at her. It was the last thing she had armored herself against, and it broke her open where a sentence would only have stiffened her spine. Her bright, hard face came apart for a moment, and then gathered itself back together. "Why?" she said, not graciously. The word seemed dragged out of her against her will. "Because I know that particular fear from the inside," said Elowen, "and because a house that has, this very evening, rid itself of one thief, has no business marking the occasion by turning a frightened woman out to beg. Good night, Mrs. Calthorpe." The dowager watched it all from her chair and said not a word, which, from her, was applause enough to fill the room. And the Duke looked at the small healing woman amid the wreck of his family's long blindness, who had every right to gloat, and had chosen mercy, and some shut thing in his face, closed fast since that far-off spring, eased quietly open at last. The Duke went to his mother that same night, when the library had emptied. Elowen took herself quietly up the stairs and left a mother and a son alone in a room together for the first time in 3 years. Through the shut door she caught only the low, broken start of it. "I was too proud to be forgiven, and so I never once asked." And then the old dry voice, gentler than she had ever heard it. "Sit down, you great fool of a boy. You've kept me waiting 3 years already. You will not keep me waiting for the asking as well." She did not listen to the rest. Some doors once open are best left to the two standing inside them. What she saw in the weeks that followed was the slow, unglamorous work of it. The Duke went down to the dower wing each morning now, and now and then the two of them could be heard arguing. Over the accounts, over the tenants, over whether he wrapped up warmly enough against a chill. And Elowen came to understand that, in that family arguing was only love that had at last remembered how to speak plainly. The shut east rooms were opened and aired. The dowager put off her plain gray for good. And once, passing the south parlor, Elowen saw the Duke asleep in the chair beside his mother's, a book fallen closed in his lap, and the old woman watching him sleep with a look on her face that mended 3 years in the space of a breath. The summer turned, and Wexmore turned with it. The fever went out of Nethercombe by August, for there was good bark now, freely given. The relief fund was reckoned to the last shilling Frayn had bled from it, and what the man could not repay, the Duke made good from his own pocket, and called it money well spent. An infirmary stood open again at the end of the lane, whitewashed and stocked, and never locked. Frayn answered to the assizes, and his ruin brought Elowen no satisfaction at all, only the quiet, level relief of a wrong set right. Sir Roland Thorne kept to his own county after that. The 3 physicians the Duke named looked into the death of the young man and found, as Elowen had always known they would, that no man living could have saved him. And they said so, over their names, and the county read it. The name of Ambrose Cray, struck down in disgrace 3 years before, was spoken clean again. It was the one grave she could not reach to tell. It was the dowager who settled the matter of the ball, in the way of the very old, which is to say, she settled it herself and informed the rest of them afterward. There had been no ball at Wexmore in 3 years. Now there would be one, the great shut rooms thrown open, the county driven up the honey-colored drive, the long gallery ablaze. "This house has remembered how to breathe," the old woman said from her chair. "And a house that has remembered how to breathe has earned the right to dance. You will throw the rooms open and manage every inch of it yourself, and this once, not from the edge of the room. It is high time the county saw whose two hands have kept this house upright." So, Alowan opened the rooms, covers struck, shutters folded back, 3 years of dust carried out in pails, the gallery filled with late roses and good candles that did not smoke. She let out a gown that had been the old Duchess's own, a plain thing of the palest gray, the unshowy color a crowded room slides its glance straight past. She had never wished to be looked at. It was not why she had come. The room looked anyway. Near midnight she was at the head of the gallery, seeing the supper laid, so lost in the work that she had forgotten herself entirely, and it was then that the Duke of Sarnes set down his glass and walked the whole length of the crowded room to reach her. Every family in the district watched him cross it. She understood only afterward that their watching had been the point. Pah! He stopped before the small, gray-gowned healing woman, who had never once crossed a room to reach him, and bowed the way a man bows when he means every eye in the place to mark it. "Miss Cray," he said, so that a great many people heard her true name spoken in a great house without a shred of shame, "will you dance?" It had been 3 years since she had danced. Her feet recalled the steps a breath before her mind did. Midway through the figure, under cover of the music, he said very low, "You will have noticed the whole room is watching." "I have, Your Grace. You have ruined me thoroughly. No healing woman dances a measure with a duke and stays a healing woman afterward." "No," he agreed. "She does not." He guided her through the turn, precise and unhurried. "I have spent a good many nights lately, wondering what she might become in its place. My mother holds a firm opinion on it, that the house cannot do without you, nor she, and that it took me a whole summer to grasp what she grasped across a wet lawn in a single afternoon. She has a habit of being right," Alowan said. "I have noticed. It is the thing about her that troubles you most. I am becoming resigned to it." And then he stopped, in the middle of the set, before the whole county, which was not done, and which set the entire gallery whispering behind its fans. "I will not ask you as a bargain, Alowan. Your father's name is clean again in 3 men's writing. Your hands would earn a good wage in any town from here to the sea. You are no friendless companion who must marry for a roof. You could walk out of this house tomorrow, your own woman, beholden to no one, and want for nothing that counts. You have no need of me at all." He held her eyes, "which is the whole reason I am asking. Every woman beneath this roof tonight came chasing the thing I happen to be. You are the one soul who came near me and never once reached for it, who stepped over me in the mud to kneel by a stranger, never guessing or caring that the stranger was my own mother, wanting nothing but to be of use. For 3 years, I was certain no living person would look at me and see a man rather than a title. And then on a hill road, by pure accident, you did." His voice dropped, low and unguarded. "So marry me if you choose it. And if you do not, then stay and go on mending the valley I let rot. My debt to you stands either way. But I should like to spend what life is left to me, being looked at by the one person who was never afraid of me and never wanted anything of me but the truth." The gallery had gone entirely still. The candles, the late roses. 3 years of locked rooms standing open to the summer dark. Alowan looked up at him. She thought of the rain on the forecourt, the heart she had counted back from its edge, the false name she had worn, like armor, the 3 quiet, invisible years she had promised herself. Safe was a small, narrow word. She had been safe the whole of her life. Not once in it, until this summer, had she been seen Cassian, she said. She had never spoken his given name. She had scarcely been sure she possessed it. The gallery heard it now. He heard it. And, What moved across his face was worth more than the name of Sarnay and every green acre it stood upon. "You may take that for a yes," she said, "should a duke require it plainly. I have kept quiet a great many years, and I find I am done with it. Yes, I will marry you, because it is mine to choose, and I choose it." And the near cousin of a smile found her own mouth. "On one condition, your grace. Ask it. Nethercombe will have a physician of its own for as long as Wexmore has a master, a real one, on a real wage, and an infirmary door never locked again, written and signed. I have grown a deep distrust of anything only ever promised." The Duke threw back his head and laughed, a sound the county had not had from him in 3 years, and it rang the length of the bright gallery. By the door, the dowager set down her glass and permitted herself, at 79, one unguarded moment of triumph. They were married by the turn of the year, quietly, in the Nethercombe church where old Ephraim lay under a stone that Eloan kept in flowers. The valley came. Tobin, 7, now and stout as a pony, carried the ring and did not drop it, a catastrophe he had privately dreaded above all others. Mrs. Seddon. Calthorpe took the still room in hand and, being clever, proved far better at setting a house to rights than at reading people for their weak places. She did not soften all at once. A woman does not unlearn 15 years of fear in a season. But she and Eloan came, if not to friendship, then to the particular regard of two people who each know from the inside how tiring fear can be. The dowager lived to see the house full again, and a great-grandchild at the font the second spring. She died in her chair in the south parlor on a bright autumn morning, her spine straight to the last. She had gone out into the world in a plain gray gown to learn whether one honest soul was left in it, had found one kneeling in the dirt on a summer lawn and brought her home. A far better ending, she had said more than once, than she had any right to. It was the one grief the good years could not mend, and Eloan did not try. She kept the old woman's still-room labels in a drawer, in her own hand now, gave the ball every summer, and did not let her be forgotten. And on a mild evening, at the close of that first married summer, the Duke came looking for his wife, and found her where some part of him had known she would be. In the library, in the chair nearest the fire, her father's brass watch open in her lap. She was not counting by it. She was only holding it the way a person holds a thing that has, after long trouble, at last come out right. "You have mended the whole valley," he said from the doorway. "There is not a soul left in it that wants saving. Whatever will you do with yourself now, Duchess?" She raised her eyes to him across the fire, steady and clear, and without a trace of fear, exactly as she had raised them from the streaming gravel on the first hour of the first day, when he had told his steward she would be gone by morning, that her sort always was. "Oh, I shall turn something up," she said. "I always contrive to. I can't walk past. You will have gathered by now, it is the one flaw I have never cured in myself, the near cousin of a smile. Now stop hovering there like a man gone overboard, and come sit by the fire." He came and sat, and the fire burned down, and around the two of them the great house breathed slow and easy, honest now and full, and no longer afraid. A house that had held its breath the better part of 3 years and had, that summer at last, been let to release it. She had come to Wexmore, meaning to vanish, and ended that year the most closely watched and most fully known woman for 40 miles in any direction, and learned, to her endless astonishment, that the thing she had spent her whole guarded life fleeing had been a lie the entire time. To be seen, wholly, by the one pair of eyes that mattered had never once been the danger she took it for. It was the only shelter that had ever been worth the name. Eloan Cray spent her whole life believing that to be seen was to be in danger, that safety lived only in the shadows, in a false name, in never being noticed at all. It took a dying valley, a grieving duke, and one old woman in a plain gray gown to teach her the truth, that to be truly known by the right heart is the safest a person can ever be. Sometimes the very thing we run from, being seen, being found, being known for who we really are, turns out to be the door to the life we were always meant to live. And sometimes the smallest kindness offered to a stranger with nothing to gain is the one that changes everything. If Alohan's story moved you, tell us in the comments who is the stranger you would have stopped to help. Subscribe for more stories of courage, kindness, and second chances, and thank you, truly, for listening.